In April 2022, Russia had a navy. It had 74 warships in the Black Sea. It had Sevastopol, a naval base so storied it predates the United States by 3 years. It had S-400 air defense covering the port. It had Kalibr cruise missiles that could reach Kyiv from open water. It had, in short, everything a superpower navy is supposed to have. Ukraine had almost nothing. No fleet worth naming, no naval doctrine designed for this, no destroyers, no submarines, no carrier aviation. What Ukraine had was a problem it needed to solve and enough engineers willing to think sideways about how to solve it. 4 years later, Russia's Black Sea fleet cannot leave port without calculating the odds of not coming back. The 240-year-old base at Sevastopol has become a hunting ground. The fallback port at Novorossiysk has been hit. The flagship is on the seabed. 2 major landing ships were put out of action in a single night in April 2026. Ukraine still doesn't have a traditional navy. It just figured out that it didn't need one. April 13th, 2022. The Moskva, Russia's Black Sea flagship, a $750 million guided missile cruiser, was struck by 2 Ukrainian Neptune anti-ship missiles and sank the following day. The ship itself was the point, not because of what the Moskva could do technically, though it was the fleet's most capable air defense platform and its loss mattered operationally. The point was what it meant symbolically and structurally. The Moskva was the ship that had fired on Snake Island at the start of the war, the ship that projected the image of an invincible Russian naval force operating freely in waters Russia considered its own. When it went down, that image went with it. Russia's official response was that an onboard fire caused ammunition to explode. They said this about a ship that had been visibly struck by missiles. It takes a particular kind of institutional commitment to that explanation to deploy it publicly. The sailors' families in Sevastopol knew the truth before the government changed the story twice. 4 years on, Russia still has not replaced the Moskva. Not a like-for-like replacement, not a comparable air defense capability, not a symbolic flagship to anchor the fleet's identity. The berth it would have occupied in Sevastopol is now one of the safer places in the harbor, because there's nothing there worth striking. For 240 years, Sevastopol meant something. It meant the warm water base Russia had fought for, fortified, lost, retaken, and built its entire Black Sea identity around. The Soviet Union and then Russia poured infrastructure into that harbor for generations. Dry docks, repair facilities, fuel storage, command infrastructure, radar networks covering the approaches. It was designed to be the anchor point of Russian naval power in the southern theater. Then Ukraine started reading the base's blueprints from the outside. The campaign against Sevastopol didn't start with ships. It started with the infrastructure around the ships, the things that make a naval base function rather than just exist. Coastal surveillance radars, communication nodes coordinating between units, patrol craft guarding the harbor entrance, fuel depots. The logic behind this targeting approach is one of the most operationally coherent things Ukraine has done in the entire war. A ship without radar cannot see incoming threats. A ship without fuel cannot maneuver. A ship without communication cannot coordinate with the air defense covering it. Destroy those support layers and the ship itself becomes dramatically easier to hit even if it's physically undamaged. On the night of April 18th to 19th, 2026, Ukraine's military intelligence unit Primary executed what is probably the most precisely coordinated strike of the entire naval campaign. The targets were the large landing ships Yamal and Nikolai Filchenkov, both Soviet-era vessels, both core to Russia's ability to move troops and equipment to Crimea by sea, both now assessed as out of action. The strike specifically targeted the command bridges of both ships. Hull damage is repairable. Bridge damage, radar, control systems, electronic infrastructure, is an entirely different problem requiring components Russia increasingly cannot source. The same operation also destroyed coastal surveillance radar, severed communication networks, struck the harbor patrol craft, and set the fuel depot at Kazachya Bay on fire. In a single night, Ukraine didn't just damage 2 ships, it disconnected the fleet's nervous system. Here is the mechanism that transforms ship losses from a painful but manageable problem into a structural catastrophe from which Russia genuinely cannot recover on any reasonable timeline. The Montreux Convention. Signed in 1936, this treaty gives Turkey legal control over warship passage through the Bosphorus and Dardanelles. For non-Black Sea nations, the restrictions are significant in peacetime. For belligerent states in wartime, Article 19 is essentially a closed door. Turkey has the authority and the legal framework to block large warships of belligerent powers from transiting the straits. Turkey invoked these provisions in February 2022. Since then, Russia cannot move major warships from the Baltic Fleet into the Black Sea, cannot reinforce from the Northern Fleet, cannot rotate vessels from the Pacific. Every ship that sinks or is put out of action in the Black Sea is gone from the Black Sea permanently. There is no reserve pool. There is no reinforcement column waiting at the other end of a strait. Whatever Russia has in that body of water right now is the entire hand. The British and the Ukrainians both understood this immediately. The Montreux Convention turned the Black Sea into a closed account. Every withdrawal is permanent. Deposits are blocked. Anyone who remembers Cold War naval strategy will feel this immediately. The Soviet Union built its entire doctrine around interior lines and fleet reinforcement. Russia inherited that doctrine. It did not inherit the legal freedom to execute it. The convention that was supposed to constrain everyone is now functioning as a one-way ratchet grinding specifically against the Russian position in the Black Sea. Turkey has, with full legal authority and considerable strategic satisfaction, been watching this unfold from the Bosphorus. The Yamal was commissioned in 1988. The Nikolai Filchenkov entered service in 1975. These are not ships in the usual sense of a military asset. They are Soviet industrial artifacts that happen to still be operational. The Soviet Union that built them had shipyards launching dozens of vessels annually under a centrally planned economy with an unlimited conscript labor force and no concern for commercial viability. That industrial apparatus is gone. What Russia has instead are yards that struggle to complete a single frigate and a flagship shipbuilding program for large amphibious vessels, the Ivan Gren class. That took 14 years to deliver its first ship. The Ivan Gren was laid down in 2004. It entered service in 2018. 14 years for one ship. The program's second vessel faced similar delays. At that pace, replacing the Yamal and Filchenkov through new construction is a project measured in decades, assuming the shipyards themselves remain operational under Ukrainian drone pressure. The Askold corvette was struck before it ever entered service. Ukraine is hitting the building program, not just the current fleet. Sanctions have made the repair situation almost as bad as the replacement situation. The radar and electronic systems on Soviet-era warships were built to Soviet standards using components from factories that were often located in Ukraine, which has since declined to supply them. Western electronics are unavailable. China can provide some alternatives, but integrating modern Chinese electronics into 50-year-old Soviet-designed systems is an engineering problem without a clean solution. The interfaces, the power requirements, the software architecture all create incompatibilities that require custom engineering work Russia's strained naval maintenance system cannot easily perform. The result is a fleet that loses ships faster than it can build replacements, cannot repair damaged vessels to full combat capability, and is watching its remaining assets age past sustainable operational limits in real time. Russia started this war needing to patrol and control a significant body of water. The fleet designed for that task is now somewhere between a quarter and a third smaller, depending on which assessment you use and what you count. The remaining ships have to cover the same operational requirements with less capacity, which means longer patrols, reduced maintenance intervals, and crews that are working harder and sleeping less. A fatigued crew on an under-maintained ship operating in contested waters with degraded radar coverage is a dramatically easier target than a fresh crew on a well-maintained vessel with full situational awareness. Every loss increases the operational burden on whatever survives. Every increase in operational burden accelerates wear and reduces combat effectiveness. Every reduction in combat effectiveness makes the next loss more likely. This is the dynamic a navy enters when it can no longer replace losses at the rate they're occurring. The pattern is not new. The Italian Navy in the Mediterranean in 1942 entered a similar dynamic. A fleet qualitatively outmatched began losing ships at a rate that compounded the quality gap until operational relevance collapsed, regardless of official order of battle figures. Russia's Black Sea Fleet has entered that territory. The ships still exist. The fleet still has an official establishment. The operational relevance is the question. The Yamal and Filchenkov weren't just ships. They were the primary means by which Russia moved heavy military equipment to Crimea by sea. Armored vehicles, artillery, ammunition, personnel in significant numbers. A large landing ship of the type Russia operates can move dozens of armored vehicles and hundreds of soldiers in a single trip across a short stretch of water. That capacity has now been eliminated. Crimea's overland supply routes are the Kerch Bridge and the roads through Kherson Oblast, and both are under persistent pressure. The Kerch Bridge closes regularly due to drone alerts. The railway ferries that supplemented it have already been destroyed. Road transport through occupied territory is slower, more expensive, more vulnerable to interdiction, and well within HIMARS range. Russia is now trying to sustain a militarized peninsula through a supply chain that has lost its most efficient component, while the remaining routes are being systematically degraded. Senior Western military analysts and retired commanders have been describing a variant of this strategy publicly for months. Isolate Crimea, make it militarily unsustainable, create the conditions for its eventual loss without a frontal assault. The naval campaign is executing the first phase of that logic without anyone having to announce it as official policy. Russian troops on the Kherson and Zaporizhzhia fronts are already feeling the downstream effects. Ammunition and equipment that cannot come by sea must come by land. Land routes are slower and under more pressure than they were a year ago. The logistical flow is genuinely thinning. Putin's political rhetoric about Crimea being permanently Russian is getting harder to sustain as the practical military situation on the peninsula deteriorates in ways that rhetoric cannot address. Ukraine's approach to the Black Sea campaign was never about building a fleet to contest Russia's fleet directly. That would have been impossible on any practical timeline, and probably counterproductive anyway. What Ukraine did instead was identify the specific functions Russia needed its naval presence to perform. Power projection, missile strikes on coastal cities, amphibious threat maintenance, logistics to Crimea, commercial shipping interdiction, and systematically degrade the ability to perform each of those functions without ever attempting to match Russia ship for ship. The Moskva sinking took out the fleet's most capable air defense platform and its symbolic center simultaneously. Repeated strikes on Sevastopol ended the safe harbor assumption. Novorossiysk got hit and removed the fallback option. Repair facilities went next, leaving damaged ships with nowhere to be properly restored. Fuel infrastructure losses reduced operational freedom to a fraction of what it was. The landing ships going out of action eliminated the amphibious logistics capacity entirely. Each operation built on the previous one. Once radar was degraded, the next strike faced less detection. Once patrol craft were hit, harbor defense thinned. Once the fleet retreated from Sevastopol, its operational range shortened, its response times lengthened, and its ability to protect assets outside the immediate port area declined. Ukraine's naval drone program, the Magura V5 and Sea Baby systems, provided the delivery mechanism, but the delivery mechanism was almost secondary to the targeting logic, identifying which components of Russian naval capability were hardest to replace. And hitting those first is the kind of operational thinking that typically requires decades of institutional doctrine development. Ukraine was improvising it under fire while simultaneously fighting a land war. The result is that a country with no meaningful surface fleet has achieved significant sea denial against a pure naval force in a geographically constrained body of water. Every navy on Earth is studying the footage and the targeting sequences. The conclusions being drawn in Beijing, Washington, London, and Delhi are not comfortable for anyone whose doctrine is built around large, expensive surface combatants. The paradigm shift argument gets made too casually in military commentary. Everything is always being called revolutionary until the next thing comes along. but the Black Sea campaign has produced specific, verifiable, operationally significant results that make the paradigm language appropriate rather than hyperbolic. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said in April 2026 that Ukraine is among the most advanced countries in drone and counter-drone technology. British Minister Al Carnes used the phrase revolution in military affairs. These are not social media takes. They are assessments from officials whose institutions have access to classified battle damage assessment and whose professional credibility depends on not embarrassing themselves with overstatement. What they're pointing at is this: cheap unmanned systems have demonstrated the ability to mission kill billion-dollar surface combatants when those unmanned systems are used intelligently against the right target sets. The Moskva cost $750 million. The Neptune missiles that sank it cost a small fraction of that. The Yamal cost over $80 million. The Sea Baby drones that contributed to the April operation cost orders of magnitude less. Russia's arms export reputation is collateral damage in this story. The S-400 has been struck repeatedly on its own soil and in Crimea. The Moskva sank. The fleet that was supposed to demonstrate Russian naval capability is retreating toward its own shores. Countries shopping for naval systems and air defense in the Middle East, South Asia, and Southeast Asia are watching the same footage everyone else is watching. The fleet that was supposed to win the Black Sea is losing it. The base that was supposed to be permanent is a target. The ships that were supposed to be replaced are being joined by more ships that won't be. Kovalenko's verdict, Russia has lost control of the Black Sea and won't recover it, is opinion, but every measurable indicator over 4 years points the same direction. Subscribe if this is the level of analysis you want. Bell's there. Whether Crimea becomes untenable before any ceasefire is exactly the argument worth having in the comments. See you in the next one.